Welcome to Actions and Limits. My name is Justin Atherton. I'm the Peak Performance Consultant for Confidence Unchained. With me as always is Paul Fortune. Paul is a mindset coach and the founder of A Call to Action. And together, we make Actions and Limits. Welcome to the show, the podcast where we talk about the actions we can take and the limits we create. Make sure you click that subscribe button here on YouTube or you follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Feel free to reach out to us via email at actionsandlimits@gmail.com or on Facebook and Instagram under Actions and Limits so you stay updated on all our upcoming content. Paul, I'm really excited for our guest coming on today. Brian Marin is going to be on the show, and I know you know that based on his content that it's going to be a good conversation and definitely stuff that I'm going to resonate with. So I'm glad that you found him to be able to come on the show, man.
Yeah, been reviewing his content for a couple of weeks now, and just to prepare for the show. And the whole time I was reviewing this, I'm thinking to myself, I'm probably not going to get much word and edgewise on this conversation because Justin's just going to jump me on something that's going to come on give me in his head that he wants to ask Brian. So I'll try my best to get a couple questions in, but I'm sure, Justin, you're going to want to take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I'll try not to hog the conversation, but I know he talks a lot about the human behavior and pattern recognition. And like you said, that's right up my alley. I love all the brain science behind the things that we do, talking about self-awareness and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to bring him on. So, man, I think we should just bring him on out, man.
Let's do it.
All right. So Brian Marin is a decorated Marine, high threat protection security professional, and subject matter expert on human behavior pattern recognition and analysis. He has spent the last 18 years conducting both real world and training operations all over the United States. Currently, Brian serves as the Vice President of Operations for Arcadia Cognerati, a special service provider specializing in assessing, developing, and conducting training and education to address urgent safety and security needs in some of the most challenging environments in the world. Brian continues to serve the veteran community as an ambassador for Carry the Load. All right, everyone, welcome Brian Marin to the show. Brian, I am super excited to pick your brain, man. Checking out your bio, a lot of really interesting stuff. So thank you for coming on the show, Brian.
Not a problem, Justin. Thanks for inviting me on and let me come on here.
So your bio is pretty impressive.
Thank you. I wrote it, so so take it with a grain of salt. I don't know.
It's interesting to me, and I get this sometimes too about coming from the law enforcement world and going into coaching. So you coming from the military world and going into that, do you find that you have some people like kind of question that, like how could you go from this world to now being in the coaching world? And I want to see like how that transition came up for you.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, if with people who don't know much about military or even law enforcement, same thing, or haven't been to their process, don't understand how built in a mentoring and coaching program is. Yeah. So like anywhere you're in the military now, it might not work out as best for you as for other people, depending on who's in charge of you, but meaning it's actually a completely built-in process of you're constantly training your replacement. So you're not just learning and training and getting educated on certain matters. You're actually learning. You have to learn how to teach and how to present and how to talk and how to mentor someone. And so it's a lot of this stuff is built into the point where when I started actually studying on my own afterwards, it was like, oh, wow, all these elements were already built in. Like this is a lot more to this than I really thought. This wasn't just some, cool sergeant with a lot of experience that I thought was awesome that was teaching me all this stuff. Like, no, he had developed that process over time, and it's built in on the military of how it is. So it's a natural progression. And so I think a lot of people don't know how much mentorship and coaching is really, really taught in the military and how much it's done on a daily. I mean, you're expected to just, hey, you've got some downtime in training or something. Someone in charge of you should be like, hey, come here, let me show you something, and go over some topic of something that might not be even relevant to what you're doing that day, but is some other skill. So you're constantly being bombarded with that, or should be constantly bombarded with that. So to me, it was a natural progression, but I could see for some people not knowing how that's built in, where I have come across that before. We're like, oh, wow, like you really know how to teach and train. It's like, well, that's a developed skill. That was not a natural skill for me at all. And I didn't know that I was being developed for it. You know what I mean? I didn't even know it was happening when I was in the military.
I like that, man. I like how you articulated that.
Take us back to, almost like the beginning. You started into the military. Mm-hmm. Is that something as a kid that you wanted to do, or how did that all come about?
Yeah, it started when you're a kid, when you're playing with G.I. Joe and stuff like that and collecting things, and then playing that cops and robbers with your friends. I think it all starts as a lot of kids have that natural, oh man, that sounds like a really cool job, or you look up to that. And then when I was in like second grade, Desert Storm happened. So I was like inundated with this stuff. So like, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I'd read up on it and watch the news conferences and all that stuff. And then when I just tell people, it's like, I never grew out of that. Like I always was in the back of my head. And then I originally started going to, after high school, went to college for a little bit. And then 9/11 happened while I was in college. And I was like, well, okay, well, if I've been looking for a time to join, if or a call or a reason to, like, it was always something in the back of my mind. I wasn't really kind of the best at school at that time because I wasn't focused, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I always knew I wanted to do this. So that was a perfect timing and kind of stars aligned. And I enlisted before finishing school back then and started that process there. But yeah, that's kind of what I tell people is just, I never grew out of that feeling. And I'm sure some guys in law enforcement, the same thing. Like, I've heard like, yeah, you play like cops and robbers as a kid and you play all these games. Like, I just wanted to keep doing that the rest of my life. You're like, yeah, you kind of get to. So.
Well, when you first got into it and you're in boot camp or whatever, were there points in your career you're like, oh, what the heck did I just do?
Well, there's a constant, oh, wow, I had no idea what I was signing up for. I mean, you really don't know. And in the good ways and bad ways, and especially in boot camp, I did pretty well in boot camp, just being a couple years older than the guys. I was the guide of my platoon. So like, you're kind of like in charge. I mean, the drill instructors are in charge, but you're still broken down into squads, and a guide is the platoon leader. And so that was my role. And part of it was because like, my old man was a Marine back in Vietnam. And then he is, doesn't realize that he kind of raises. I mean, I was in martial arts since I was 6. I had to do a certain number of push-ups, sit-ups, and a whole bunch of stuff before I could open presents up on Christmas morning when I was 6 years old, which I thought was just totally normal and fun. Like it wasn't like a punishment. I was like, yeah, this is awesome. And then I found out later in life, like no one else I know had to do that kind of stuff. So we were just kind of like an athletic family, and my dad had a strict routine like that. So, and I was like I said, I was in martial arts as a little kid. So it was kind of a lot more natural for me. Whereas some people just got plucked out of a situation, never even left their hometown or neighborhood even, and were now exposed to this, where I kind of had that without knowing it. So I did a little bit better, but there are plenty of moments where you're like, oh my God, what the hell am I doing with my life right now? I can't believe I signed up for this. And the one thing, it's kind of a gross one, but boot camp, you're pretty nasty during there. And like one of the things was once someone gets pink eye in the platoon, it just goes around because everyone's in such close contact. And I remember like getting pink eye in both eyes and having to pour hand sanitizer in it to kill it. And like also doing push-ups right afterwards, going like, what is going on here? What am I doing with my life? But you definitely have a lot of those experiences, and that's kind of where that you find out later in life. That's where that growth comes from. That's where you get that, you develop that resilience to go, well, I signed up for it, so here we go. Let's see what happens next.
It's an interesting thing too, especially when you're part of the training aspect. I'm still involved with the training within law enforcement, and I was having an interesting conversation the other day to a new officer, and kind of trying to prepare him for what the life is like and what it does to you. Mm-hmm. What are some things that you would tell yourself, when you joined up, that now that you're like, man, you got to be prepared for this type of stuff?
So I kind of was able to pass on some of that to my younger brother. Went into the Navy, became a SEAL, and he's out of the Navy now. But like, So same thing, like he wanted to join the Marine Corps after I did, kind of like I did. And I told him, hey, he was in school, but he got like a college football scholarship. So he's a stud athlete. I was like, hey man, like whatever you do, first of all, just finish college and then figure out after that. And then he wanted to join the Marine Corps still. And I was like, look, man, knowing what I know, you might fit in better in this community over here. And it turns out he did. But some of those things I would tell him, the same thing I told people, was one, like, you got to expect the unexpected. Understand that everything is it's just a mental game. Like, the more you embrace the fact that you're in a really, really horrible, crappy situation, you'll just deal with it better and you'll realize it and push through that kind of denial phase of, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Right. If you push through that, yeah, it's just, and that's what all those terms come from, is that. And the actual other thing that I told him, which no one ever really told me, and I just was able to do it throughout my life experiences. I told him, volunteer for everything. When someone says, hey, we need someone to go do this, and you're tired and you don't want to do it, or you kind of hide out and just go do it. Just go. Just be the guy or girl who says, I'll do it. I got it. I go, 1, you're going to get noticed. 2, every time I've done something like that, it led to some connection that came back and was really positive in a way. I mean, literally to my business connection right now with my business partner, Greg Williams, who I've met throughout several years. I was in Afghanistan and I was working for a government agency, and then I volunteered for something because I got to go to the airport in Kabul as well and do some shopping while I was there. It wasn't my turn to go out. I was on a rest down day, and it was like, hey, I'll roll with that. And then lo and behold, I run into a guy I hadn't seen in a couple of years, whose lives we kept crossing paths. And that was Greg Williams, who he then hired me when I got back from there. I have our own business together. If I had never done that, I may never have ever run into him again. Sure. So it's like these weird connections that happen. And I just told him, like, volunteer for everything, because after a while you get, even if it's just getting beat down for a little bit, like you just get so used to it, it doesn't bother you anymore.
Sure.
Sure.
Plus, you're trying everything. You're putting yourself out there, like you said, and be like, well, let me try a little bit of this. Let me try a little bit of this, because there's that resistance to,
and it's skill development. Like you might learn something, like, and that's what I keep telling people too, is like, just learn a new skill. And everyone's like, well, what is that? Like, I don't know. Did you volunteer for something? Like, I'll do that. And next thing you know, you're sitting there and someone's showing you that's how you learn how to back up a trailer for the first time in your life, if you've never done that. I mean, it sounds stupid, but like, you now have an experience that will come in handy someday for you. And so like little stuff like that is where I've, looking back, been able to go, hey man, that's where actually I learned that, or that was a good thing to do. So
it kind of ties into a conversation I was having the other day where, people like to say, I don't like these certain aspects of my job. I don't like doing that. Well, is it that you don't like it, or that you haven't been exposed to it enough to where you're confident to do it on a regular basis? Because it goes to something simple. I remember teaching my daughter to ride a bike. And the first couple of times when she was struggling with it, she's like, Daddy, I don't like riding a bike. I don't want to do this. And I'm like, well, hang on. Is it that you don't like it, or that you haven't learned it yet? Because once she got it, then it was like every day, I want to ride my bike. I want to ride my bike. So it's the same thing with adults. Once you get proficient, once you get confident with that, then you're like, man, I got this. This is easy. I like doing it.
That's a great example and a great point. And we're all guilty of doing that, maybe not being competent in certain areas, so you don't like doing it. And especially for guys, it's much harder because we have more of a little bit of an ego, and we don't want to look dumb or stupid or do something wrong in front of people. And like, I've been able to, over years, just kind of have that mindset now of just like, hey, I'm the dumbest guy in the room, man. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, please just show me. And then when you open that, and now that as a trainer, when someone walks up and says, dude, I have no idea what I'm doing, you immediately want to be like, all right, come here, man. I'm here for you. You know what I mean? You automatically want to help that person even more than the guy or girl shows up is like, yeah, dude, I got this. And you're like, you don't got this, and it's fine. Like, I do that in every room I walk into, because I get to work around some super, super smart people, very highly accomplished. And I'm usually like the youngest guy around. So I'm just like, all right, I'm the dumbest guy in here. So I want to learn everything I can. And what you learn over time is what people really do know. And then when they're stepping out of their area of expertise, going into another area, you're like, no, you're not an authority on that topic. Yeah. I know right now you're just kind of making up as you go along. So I always do that, is like, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing. Show me. And now you've had that experience. That instructor's like, oh, dude, yeah, come on, man, I totally got you. You know what I mean? And then you get the best instruction that way too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, it seems like your transition from military life to civilian life was fairly smooth, correct? Or
no. So
No.
that's like absolutely not. So I kind of just put mine off for a really long time. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I then started working for the Marine Corps as an instructor at this facility, then started deploying again, doing security work for different folks and all over the place. So like, I just never stopped. I never got out of it. I just did it almost like on a civilian contracting side versus a military side. And there were a few years straight where I was gone for 3 months, home for a month, gone for 3 months, home for a month. And then like, yeah, I had some serious issues when it was time to actually, like what I say, like grow up and face music and get a real job sort of thing. These terms that people use, even though I was accruing experience and gathering all this stuff and learning and moving around and getting to know a lot of people, like I had a rough time, and I literally I lived by myself for 2 years, didn't get in any serious relationships, really had to focus on me and figure out what the hell I'm doing, where I'm at, because you just go down this path and this road, then you literally wake up and it's, 10 years, 5 years later or whatever, and you're like, wow, what am I doing here in the middle of Saudi Arabia when we're starting a war with Yemen? What's going on here? How did I end up here? And you're just like, okay, what am I doing? I got to take a step back and figure out, where do I want to go in life now? Because I've just been in this kind of like go. I call it living your life at your front sight post. I mean, you when if for anyone who's not shooter in any way or have an experience, when you're say firing a pistol, you're always focused on that front sight, very clear sight picture on that, and then you put it on your target. Well, if you can't see past that, then where are you going? So my whole thing was I was living right there the whole time at bang, going, all right, this is what I got to do right now today, and not really taking it. So it took a while to kind of transition out, like you say, get used to it. And I had to just it was funny because I just looked back and was like, well, what's made me successful? What have I learned the most at? That's, all these sayings that get comfortable being uncomfortable. So I developed friendships and relationships with people who had nothing to do with the military, who were never but they were like-minded people that I got along well with. And so I had to get out, put myself out there and expose myself to people in situations that I'm not normally comfortable with. Like, none of these people have combat experience. They don't know or think the same way that I do. They're not like, yeah, sure, I could go hang out with the cops from my neighborhood because we're going to get along great. But I need to branch out and be uncomfortable and be exposed to the thing and be okay with it. And so that's what I've just always tried to do. And it's tough. It's not easy to do.
Did you have a eureka moment?
No, so just because I study and teach and understand a lot about human behavior, I understand how it works. So environment is a huge thing. So think about your kids, the environment they grow up in is massive. Now there's not talking about the nature versus nurture debate. I mean, literally from a sociological perspective, who they hang out with is who they're going to become. And that's why you want to know who your kids are hanging out with and what they're doing, right? It's because that they're going to mimic those behaviors. Everything's based on mimicry, especially in social situations, especially when you're young, so that's how we learn. As little kids, you mimic the behavior of your parents, you mimic the behavior of your friends. So I just found people that had good, healthy relationships. My buddy and his wife were just awesome people and they loved each other. And you could tell, and I went, okay, well, I want that in my life. Not them, but meaning I want to have that. So, okay, I'm going to be around that. And then you start to automatically, almost through osmosis, start to learn and mimic that behavior. And then you start to find what it is that you like and what you want. And that environment is so critical and so huge. And that's why I had to say, I had to get out of just hanging around with other veterans or guys who are still on active duty or whatever, because not that there's anything wrong. It just, that was always my comfort zone. That's my place. I can always go in, I can say whatever I want to say. I can do whatever I want to do. I'm never going to cross a line because someone's going to come up and say something even crazier than me. But I have to learn what's outside of this, you know what I mean? And so that's what I did. I just said, well, I'm gonna mimic that behavior. I'm gonna surround myself with people who I would be okay with being that person. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like that. And I just looked at it that way, and it helped a lot.
There's so many good points you brought up in there, because the whole exposing yourself to new people and the mirroring neurons. I'm like geeking on the science while you're talking about some of this, because when you start picking up on the behaviors of other people, and it goes into, those top 5 people you surround yourself with, and, raising yourself up, but also having different circles of influence that you can deal with. It's fine having, your military group or law enforcement group, but, I found myself in the same way, like when you hang around cops all the time, we talk about the same crap every day. And it's like, guys, this is not stretching my brain. It's not.
But sometimes that works as a coping mechanism for some of the issues that you're dealing with. You can be like, so it's very important to have that group that you can just go, you can say whatever and no one's going to judge what comes out of your mouth, no matter how crazy or wild it is. They're going to be like, man, that's a good one. Let me tell you a story. And you're like, Jesus. But what you're talking about right there is that having that, adaptability, right? I can adapt to different situations. There's some people that are like, hey man, this is just who I am. I'm always like that. You can't change me. It's like, well, then you're the problem. Like if you I don't talk to my brother the same way I talk to my mother. That would be absolutely insane. I would never do that. But if you can be more adaptable in different groups and you're able to fit in different places, that's what builds resilience. And it's kind of funny because I was a sniper in the Marine Corps. I mean, the whole idea was to blend in with your surroundings. Now you're supposed to not get found, right? Don't get compromised. Put on this ghillie suit and match your terrain. Well, that's exactly what I did in a sociological way with my friends of just like, all right, I got to go to this meeting with a bunch of executives. Okay, I'm going to dress, I'm going to talk, I'm going to walk just like they did. I'm going to carry myself that way. Well, then I'm down here and it's a time on the range with the boys at this training course that I'm going to help them teach. Okay, well, I'm going to walk and I'm going to talk and I'm going to act like them. I mean, you become that, and that allows you just more file folders, more experiences to draw from in later groups. And for me, for what I do for human behavior, I'm like, look, it's all the same. We're all the same. We have our little hobbies that are different, but we're all the same. I mean, there's no change. There's like 7 different types of people in the world, and that's about it. Maybe 9. I don't know.
See, I want you to go into this stuff because this is stuff, and Paul and I were talking about this before we got on the air, because he knows, I love this type of stuff because you talk about human behavior, pattern recognition, and even some of your content going into just the situational awareness. So what are like the main topics that you teach on with the people you work with?
So we call it human behavior pattern recognition and analysis because it's a scientific term. It's actually, the joke is that's the hardest thing you're going to have to remember to say when you go through one of our courses. The rest of it's very intuitive, but it's a process that my business partner, Greg Williams, he developed a long time ago, brought it to the military. Well, they kind of brought him, and then he wrote what was called the Combat Hunter program for the Marine Corps. And then they hired him away to go work for the Army, and they call it the advanced situational awareness training. And then there's the soft version in the maritime, and we did suicide prevention training and sexual harassment assault prevention training. The idea is it's all about how do I prevent a catastrophic event from occurring? How do I not walk into an ambush? How do I pick out someone who's likely going to commit suicide before they do it? I just all pre-event indicators of different situations. But to me, is the way I instructed, it's all the same. So if you look at all humans are innately good at human behavior pattern recognition. So think back to even when you were a little kid, your mom or dad or grandma, aunt and uncle, whoever raised you, when they walked in the room, before they ever said a word, you knew whether they were happy, whether you were about to get a whooping, whether they were busy, whether they're angry or something, right? So that's the essence. That's human behavior pattern recognition. What we never get taught is the analysis. And so what happens is everyone tries to analyze stuff, and they usually base it on things like ideology or some thing that is interesting to study, but kind of like, well, you're kind of only looking at it one lens. They'll say,
subjective.
It's not just that it's subjective, it's usually one dimensional. So someone will go like, oh, it's because of their skin color. And you're like, dude, you're gonna judge their behavior based on the amount of melanin in their skin. Like take this first, just take a step back real quick. Like that's just a ridiculous standard. It's like, oh, well, it's their religion. It's like, well, I don't know. Well, it's their political. It's like, okay, like, why don't we just look at their behavior? Sure. And so we take the whole behavioral approach to it. I don't care about what your ideology is. And so all humans demonstrate their intent. So whatever it is you intend to do, you will demonstrate that in some way, whether that's, you getting up to walk to your to go to your car, you're going to first stop, look around, grab your keys, grab your stuff. I can look at you and look at where you're going. Okay, that person's likely leaving the building. These are just minute, basic observations you see all the time. But what we try to do is add value to certain things so you can conduct predictive analysis and go, well, look at where this is heading. Let's intervene now before it gets to be a problem. And that's what we do. And we do it at a scientific level. So clients from everywhere from tier 1 military units to schools, hospitals, churches, law enforcement. We're doing a lot of law enforcement right now, which is a good thing because everything we do is all about, hey, it's left to bang. De-escalation isn't when the incident's already occurred. It's prior to that. It's having this concept of how do I get this situation to end with the best benefit for all, just for that's safest for all, considering lives on both sides of the badge. That's our take on it. It's like, look, this is how we approach it. And so I get it to go into a lot of different areas with it. And I've got to meet a ton of super smart people, and it's really, really cool, but it's a constant development. I mean, once you see it, once the scales fall from your eyes, you're like, oh my God, like all of this stuff is preventable. And you're like, yeah, it really is. But that's a good problem to have, meaning it's not like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. No, like these problems are preventable.
I love all of that stuff. And it almost goes into like the OODA loop, right?
Yeah.
Observing.
What is the OODA loop?
Brian, go ahead, man.
So the OODA loop was, all right. So I'll give you a quick background history on the OODA loop, but we did a whole entire podcast on it because, it was created by a guy by the name of John Boyd. John Boyd was a colonel in the Air Force, fighter pilot, but also a brilliant genius. So he created something called energy maneuverability theory, which he basically changed how airplanes were designed. Once he came up with that, airplane design for the world changed at that moment because they went, wow, we can use your mathematical formulas to test if this is going to work prior to even building this. That's incredible, right? So he came up with all the stuff. So I'm just giving you background on how smart this dude was. And then he came up with the OODA loop, which he didn't even fully understand, and he wrote the thing. But the idea was, from a fighter pilot's perspective, if I can observe the enemy, orient in their direction, make a decision, and then act on that decision, that's a decision loop, right? That's a mental model. That's a loop that's continuously updating. If I can do that faster than them, I'm going to win every time. So the idea was, I don't need the biggest, baddest aircraft. I don't need that. I just need to outthink my opponent, and I need to be able to maneuver quicker. So then what happened was the Marine Corps said, wow, this is amazing, because the Marine Corps is all about maneuver warfare and being light and fast and mobile and just being able to strike anywhere. And that was the whole thing. So they really glammed onto it. So it became this whole idea of observe, orient, decide, act at a very simple level. But that's a very high level process, meaning he was talking about physics. He was talking about the laws of thermodynamics. He was talking about biology. He was talking about physiology. He was talking about, this is what he got into. So the whole idea is, if I can apply this kind of mental model to a number of different areas of my life, because one, you're never going to have all the information that you need. You're just never going to. But once you realize, like, okay, I have to make the best decision at the best time for the best reason. All right, if that's my standard, then that's much better, because all I'm doing is I'm outthinking my opponent so I can get into their OODA loop. So we do that a lot with law enforcement. It's like, all right, they have someone pulled over and the guy starts going for a gun. It's like, all right, you're already reacting to what they're doing. Okay. So if you're reacting to what's going on, you're behind the curve. So how do I change the situation? Either slow down time, maneuver, adapt to a different way of thinking or different plan of action, so I can get ahead of the curve. Now you have to go off of what I'm doing. So now I'm winning that fight. So no matter what that is, that's a conversation, that's an interrogation, that's a no crap fist fight, that's a board meeting, that's a planning session. Like, you can use it for so many different areas. And so that's just one example of like Boyd was a literal genius who was writing this stuff on like bar napkins and yelling at people, explaining it. And they were like, hey dude, we're not even at your level. Can you break this down for us a little bit? So it's just but he came up with that simple, elegant way of saying observe, orient, decide, act. There's a whole lot behind it, but he really just kind of tried to simplify these different mental models for what people have been studying about decision making under stress and communication and information and understanding. So there's a lot behind it, but that's just one version. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great stuff, man. Like I was just playing with this the other day, thinking about like how it can really be broken down even into the civilian world. And you brought up some of those board meetings, having conversations in whatever leadership aspect, having that orient, observe and, decision and just act, because a lot of people are stuck in that. Well, what should I do? They're stuck in that decision mode, right? Like, what should I do? And then they're never taking action. So I love how you ran that down.
And what I've seen more so on the civilian side is you got like, I've seen organizations or teams or whatever, you got like really, really, really smart, hardworking people. And like, from my perspective, I'm like, man, you're nowhere near as effective as you could be because of a number of different reasons. But a lot of times it's the civilian side is more like ready, fire, aim. I call it, they just go, oh, we got this idea. Let's go. It's like, hang on, we got to plan. Like no one does any planning and like, because they think it's going to take too much time or lose it. It's like, no. But that's a day-to-day skill set basis. I always have to tell my wife like, hey babe, take a second. Don't go rushing out of the house. Think about your day and the best way you're going to do it. Like you said, you got to go run and do these 6 things. So she's just going around. Oh, I got to go here. I got to pick up Harper. I got to go to the store. I got to do this. It's like, all right, stop, take a look at where everything is on a map. Figure out the best route to do it to the most efficient way possible. In 2 seconds, she's like, oh yeah. Okay, well, oh yeah, I'm going to go do that first because that's closer and right here. And it just a simple having a plan is better than just responding to everything as it comes into your world.
Let me interject on that. I could imagine that could cause conflict sometimes where you say that to your wife. I don't think that always goes so well.
No, I definitely oversimplified it for sure. And so, but she gets it and she gets super annoyed with me because like, she's like, I know you're right now, but just let me do my thing. And I go, okay, like this isn't about who's right or who's wrong, babe. I'm just trying to explain, but it's little stuff like that. But the point is I've had a ton of training experience in that. She hasn't, like, because she's really smart and knows how to do everything. I'm like, babe, if you just took 5 seconds to come up with a plan, like you already have all the answers, just plan it out for a minute. And then she was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like I do know how to do all this stuff. This isn't overcomplicated. It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah. It is interesting though. In the leadership and interview classes I teach, we definitely tell the guys, do not use this on your spouse, especially when it comes to micro expressions and in reading, either deception or some type of hidden emotion. So there's a lot of these tools that it's like, hey, they're amazing tools as a leader. They're not so effective as a spouse. So it's like understanding that fine line to walk on where to use these tools.
Context is very important.
Very important. Very, very important.
Yeah.
So how else? I know you mentioned your business partner. How do you guys work together? Is it you one-on-one clients, or is it mainly corporations that you step into to teach these skill sets?
We've done it from everything from conventional military forces to smaller specialized units to, like you said, like executive type level training. We've done some like kind of smaller like personal stuff. It's just not very. It's not cost effective for an individual. So we have to charge it the same amount of money. So it's generally going to be more affordable for an agency or a company versus an individual. But we have done that. And so it just depends on the size. And then what it is basically the smaller the group, the more intense, the more they get. The larger the group, it's a little bit more topical and a little bit more big picture. So it just depends on how we do it and who the audience is really. Obviously it's tailored. Like, we have our core skill sets that you're going to learn, but like I will teach those same skill sets. I literally taught a SEAL team 1 week, and then the next week was a group of teachers. So it's like the same skill set. They're going to be using those a little bit differently, but it's the same science and the same skill set, right? I mean, one's trying to find the kid who they really need to focus on because they need the most help. The other one is like, all right, who out of all the people in the village, who do we have to kill? You know what I mean? It's just that so two different applications of the same exact skill set.
And where do you want to take your business?
Well, we're headed in that direction. Where we want to take it is there's a lot of things at the kind of operational and strategic level, both inside and outside government, where we think I've always thought that's where our key demographic and where we should be at. Like, it's easy for me, like when I brief like a police agency and say like, hey, this is what we do. They're like, dude, this is awesome. Like, of course we want to do it. Right. So we say, have it at hello. But what we want to really affect change is kind of at that upper level. to get the decision makers to kind of open their eyes and see some of these problems a little bit better and some of the solutions that they already have on hand and how to solve them. That's where I want to take it, and that's where it's going, and we're getting there, and it's pretty awesome. But to really, really affect the change, because that's what our program is about. It's about moving the needle. Well, there's ways we could probably operate a little bit better to make more money, but the overall goal right now is like, I don't want you just to go pay for a course and say, hey, that was cool, thanks. Yeah. Like, I want you to come back and be like, dude, you don't understand, like, I use this all the time because I went through your training. We even get police officers, Justin. We got guys calling and reaching out just because of the podcast we do, like, dude, you were talking about this, and then I talked about it at morning roll call, and then we had our biggest dope bust we've ever had because of this vehicle we saw, and every indicator you were talking about was right there. Mm-hmm. And we're like, that's so cool from listening to a podcast. It just, because all it does is flip on a switch that you already have. It's already there. And you go, oh, wow, now I know how to link it. Now I know how that applies to me. Here's how I use it. Same thing. We get school teachers like, hey, we were able to identify this kid using artifacts and evidence in support of a reasonable conclusion and step in prior to a really, really bad thing happening. And when we hear that, it's the greatest paycheck in the entire world. Like, I really can't even describe it. Or guys calling in from overseas still like, hey, we saw this ambush before we walked into it. Like, we would have stepped right on this IED, or we would have walked in this. And you're just like, dude, when I read those emails, I get chills, and I love it. And it makes everything worth it.
I literally was getting chills while I was sitting here listening to it, because it was just making me think about, because I love how you put that, because it's not about the money. It's about having effective training that is universal. And when you get that feedback, man, there's nothing like that. And
yeah, it is. And you can't, now it'll take a little bit longer, but over time that'll pay off.
Yes.
It's going, like, we have a valuable skill set. We know what the market is for it. People want it. People need it. So, like, we're not concerned about that. We're like, how do we get the right message to the right person? Everything else will fall into place after that.
And I love how these skill sets are so universal. Mm-hmm. I think that's such a huge thing. Go ahead, Paul.
You mentioned the decision makers. Who are the decision makers?
So there's government level at local, state, and federal that are sometimes career folks, sometimes political appointees. There's kind of operational level folks at same thing at different major organizations that we've worked with too, that really see it and go, holy crap, like, this is how I can change and operate my business in a better manner, or this is how I can meet these great platitudes that we have on the wall, or, hey, this is our mission statement. And I walk into that organization, and when the person at the front desk greets me, I go, hey, what does that mission statement mean to you? And they go, oh, that one on the wall? I don't know. They just put that up like a few months ago. It's like, okay, means nothing. If the person you walk in at your front door that's greeting everyone that comes in doesn't understand how that applies to them, then it's useless. It's an empty platitude. So when you get up into that operational and strategic level thinkers and people are doing it, and you see that you can convince them, and they can see that, hey, this isn't just like part of well, you got to understand this is part of the bureaucratic process, or you understand, like, this is just corporate culture. And it's like, no, you can affect the change. Some are trying, a lot of them are really trying. You see those, the cool ads that they make, or the sayings that they have, or how they want to do it. But you get down to that street level, and someone like me walks in and goes, yeah, you're not really living up to this. And they're like, oh, and it's because they don't know how. And a lot of, especially in private sector and not anything outside of law enforcement and military, people don't understand training. They understand education, and education's important. I got a couple degrees too. It's all good. It's all wavy gravy. But yeah, there we go. Yeah, fight on. Are you a USC grad?
No, I'm in Southern California.
Yeah, okay. So we always make sure everyone understands the difference between training and education. Education is that little online click through thing you did. Sign this piece of paper saying you understand this. It's not effective. It's meant for one thing. Like, we can read a bunch of books about theory, and that's great, but if you don't operationalize that information, it's useless, right? So we always do training, and training changes behavior. It's what we say. And that's different. And it doesn't have to be something elaborate. The problem is, especially in private companies, like, man, like, they look at that as a cost. They don't look at it as, as an investment, right? So even in law enforcement, like, I was years ago back, I was able to talk to some people, and express my opinions. It didn't go over well, but it was when they said, oh, we're going to hire, 1,000 more police officers. And I'm like, it's not going to do anything. That will not change one crime statistic in this city. And they were like, well, we're going to hire more. I was like, yeah, you already have enough. Why don't you invest in the ones you already have? I go, you know what, that 1,000 police officers over a 20-year career costs the taxpayer billions of dollars. So why don't you just spend like $100 million training the people you already have right now, giving them better equipment, giving them better pay, giving them better health services, like make it so that this is the most competitive job in the city and you're going to get the most competitive people. Yeah. Like give them the best training in the world. Like if you're going to be there for 20 years, that should be an ongoing process. And that's just going to be 20% of your time should be training. And they're like, you can't afford that. I was like, but you just said you're going to hire 1,000 more people. Like, Jesus, that cost is extraordinary. So I just look at it differently. As most organizations and people are the problem, right? And people are the answer. So you already have the answers and you already have really good people at your place. Why don't you just empower them by training them? Go like, give them the best that you can give them. And then you get to expect the best out of them. You get to raise the expectation level when you do that too. So people forget that, like, oh, we're going to put all this money in training. I was like, yeah, now you get to hold them to a higher standard. Yeah. They're like, oh, okay. It's like, see, that's how you raise the standard, is you invest in them. So
great stuff, Brian. I love how you distinguish between training and education, because it is a huge difference. And the fact that you talk about how training changes behavior. I completely agree with that.
It's our company motto. So
I love it. Well, so what's the best way for people to reach out to you, Brian?
So our company is called Arcadia Cognerati. Arcadia is very old and very Greek, and Cognerati is a made up word. So it's the people who we're going to be original. We always give points for originality. So just people who deal with cognition and metacognition. We're thinkers, man. I don't carry a gun anymore. I don't have that stuff. There's everywhere I go, there seems to be enough of them there already. So if I want one, I'll just take yours. Or if I need one. And so it's all about cognitive skills, and that's what we do. And so we have arcadiacognerati.com. You can go to the website, you can Google me, and then we have the Left of Greg podcast, and it's a kind of a take on a few terms, but that's our human behavior podcast. So we do a whole bunch of different topics. So, some of it's law enforcement related, like, hey, this is how we break down a case. Some of it's general human behavior related. Some of it's resilience. Some of it's, we've had infectious disease experts. We've had so many different people come on, and we just talk about everything from HBPRNA, human behavior pattern recognition analysis. This is how we break down behavior in this specific case. And so it gets us into some really, really cool discussions.
That's awesome, Brian.
Justin asked me why Left of Greg, and my answer was, I don't know. So explain that to us.
So Left of Greg is a take on a couple things. One, whenever we go somewhere, I always have to drive. And so I'm always driving and Greg's on my right. So I'm always sitting to the left of him. And then all the conversations we have on the podcast are literally like, that's how it started on a long drive. Actually, we're briefing up at USC at their Institute for Creative Technology. On a drive back down to Oceanside out here in North San Diego County. And we're just having this conversation. And I was like, you understand this is a podcast. People will listen to this. And Greg's like, what's a podcast? You know what I mean? Like, I had to explain that to him. So I'm always sitting to the left of him. And then it's a take on a book that was written about his work called Left of Bang, which is, I won't get into, but Greg wrote the Combat Hunter program. A couple of guys got out of the Marine Corps, wrote a book about it. Everyone is real popular about the book, but it's all his work. So it's a take on the Left of Bang and me sitting left of Greg. So I just called it Left of Greg. I thought it was kind of fun.
Well, Brian, I'm super excited to check out some more of your content, whether it's a podcast or the website. That's definitely stuff that's right down my alley.
Yeah. Check it out, because we got some webinars on the website too, just free, that we've done. We did a whole bunch last year and we posted them on there. So there should be a bunch on there you can watch too. Awesome stuff, man. So we like to wrap up the show with the idea of the title of our podcast in mind, and ask a couple questions to our guests. So what would you say is the number one action that people need to take out there that will make a significant difference in their life? So the number one action, it's a good question and a tough question, because I think it's a personal for each person, but I really think you have to do one thing every day. That's it. Like, you just have to, whatever your goal is, whatever you're trying to achieve, All you have to do is take one step a day. That's it. That it does not matter. I don't care what it is. If you are scared to get out of bed, that one step might be putting one foot on the floor. There you go. Now tomorrow you put the other one on the floor. Like, you don't have to make these radical, huge changes. It's small, subtle changes over time. And I know a thing or two about your brain chemistry and reward behavior, and it's much more efficient to do it that way, and you're going to get results that way. Meaning you're going to have long-term results. So I say the action is just do one thing today. That's it.
I like that. Simple. Do one thing, right? I love it. And then it snowballs, like you said, that reward behavior. So the other side of actions and limits are these self-imposed limits that we put on ourselves. And I know you've seen a lot of that. What would you say is the most prevalent limit that people need to remove right away?
You know, the ability to say yes or no. And what I mean by that is some people get maybe scared or intimidated to do something, or I'm not sure. And when someone asks them, you just say yes. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then the other on the opposite end is say no. I mean, I say it's a joke, but we always say the easiest word in the English language to say is no, and it's not. People have a hard time saying, even when like I'm giving a brief to someone and I know like, this probably isn't going to happen with this client. And they're like, okay, well, we'll think about it. I was like, hey man, like the easiest thing you could say to me is no right now. That way we don't have to waste each other's time. And people are like, whoa. And I'm not being a jerk about it or forceful, but saying no to someone is okay. And saying yes to something that you're uncomfortable with is okay, because you have to set those limits, right, for yourself and others. And one of the ways I describe it as saying you teach people how you want to be treated. Yes. And they teach you how they want to be treated. We do that in the words we use, the clothing we wear, the way we act, the way we behave. All of those things informs others of what's important to you. So my limits, don't ever be afraid to push yours. So say yes, and don't ever be afraid to put limits up of your own and say no. I mean, it's saying yes and saying no are very important things to do. I hope that makes sense. I don't know.
No, completely makes sense. Like you said, saying yes to new things, to expand yourself, to make yourself uncomfortable, and saying no to things that aren't going to fit in your schedule. Yes. It's almost more respectful sometimes to say no.
It is. It's 100% more respectful for you and the other person, because you really might want to do that or help that or get involved. But if you can't, you can't. You only have so much time. Is the most valuable commodity in the world, and you only got so much of it. So
exactly. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I think we could have talked for a couple more hours.
Yeah, thank you guys. I didn't realize we've been going this. I thought we were on here for 15 minutes. So
So thank you so much for joining us, man. A lot of great insight. I know everyone watching or listening really got a lot out of this conversation.
I appreciate it, Justin and Paul. Thank you both for having me on here, man. And I appreciate I appreciate what you guys do, because you're putting these positive things out in the world. I know you guys get a lot out of these amazing conversations. I have a podcast. I get a lot out of it. I've now been able to go on others, and I actually, it's so much more enjoyable because I log off here and I don't have to do anything else. So I appreciate you guys, because I know the back end work is where it all happens, and there's a lot to do. So I respect it, and I respect your time. So thank you for letting me eat up some.
Wow, that was such a great interview, Paul. I'm so glad Brian was able to come on the show. And really, I could have talked to him for a couple more hours. I know we only touched the tip of the iceberg on all the science stuff, brain science going on behind the scenes, but a lot of great stuff, man.
Absolutely. And I'm loving, we're going to bring on Greg down the road, his partner, and hear his side of the coin. But yes, you know what I was thinking? Did you ever see American Sniper?
Yes.
I think they should have replaced Bradley Cooper with Brian. He would have done a better job.
Well, he's been there, right? And he's got the mentality behind it and what it takes, and actually what you go through in those type of processes. So I think that would have been,
and Hollywood, he has the Hollywood sniper look. That's who you would cast to be the sniper. A good-looking guy, but rugged. I mean, you got it.
He's gonna, when he listens back, he's gonna be like, "Oh, cool, great, awesome! I got the Hollywood sniper look," No, he was really great. A lot of awesome information. And like you told me when you said he was coming on the show, you knew that him and I were gonna, have a lot in common in the stuff we talk about. So I'm excited to check out even more of his content. So really, really great guest. So, but let's wrap up the show with another segment of Ask Paul Anything. Make sure to continue to send your questions into actionsandlimits@gmail.com, and you can have your question featured on the show. Paul, you said you found one in the emails that stood out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is from Maria in Arizona, and she writes in and says, Paul, what is in your opinion, what is an underestimated sense?
An underestimated sense.
Like, in my opinion.
Okay.
And I think you and I agree on this one, Justin. I definitely agree with you on this, and I think it's underestimated. And that's a sense of smell. Sure. Because when I have a sense of smell, sometimes it brings me back to a memory that happened 10 or 15 years ago that I didn't even think about. That was not even in my brain chemistry,
Sure.
But because of that scent, it brought me back 10 or 15 years ago, and I can tell you what I was doing, what was going on. So the sense of smell.
I completely agree. People kind of, put it off as something that well, it's just something you smell. It's not a big deal, but we actually retain 60% of what we smell, and it's triggered to more memories than what you read, what you see, what you hear. So your sense of smell, you actually retain more information from that. So there's a lot of science behind that as well. And what's interesting is that it's something that we talk about in asking like victims of crime, asking them, well, what did you smell during the incident? Now, it seems like an odd question to ask, but it's definitely something that can trigger some memories. Well, I smelled cigar smoke, or I smelled gasoline. Like, what was the smell that could lead to some other type of evidence or actually finding something? So, I completely agree with that.
Is that why the elephant doesn't forget?
I think so. It must be linked to smell. They remember everybody by the scent. So I think that's probably it. So really great episode, Paul. I'm so glad that you found Brian and had him come on the show.
We have to thank Adam Parr for that.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam, for sharing another wonderful guest with us. Love that we're involved in this podcast community and having these wonderful guests come on the show. So another great episode, Paul.
Absolutely. For Justin Atherton, this is Paul Fortune. We'll see you next week.
All right. See you next Monday. Thank you for listening to the show. Don't miss an episode. Click and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform and find us on Instagram and Facebook under Actions and Limits to stay updated on all our upcoming content. Continue to email the show at actionsandlimits@gmail.com for our segment Ask Paul Anything. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.